What if the most dangerous villain in Gotham isn't just a man, but an idea that refuses to die? From a past that may never be real, to a laugh that echoes long after the chaos ends, the Joker is more than Batman's greatest enemy. He is a question without a clear answer. In this deep dive, we follow every version, every rise, every fall, and every return, uncovering how one figure can reshape a city, break minds, and challenge the very meaning of order. But as we move deeper into his story, one thought lingers quietly in the background. Is the Joker something that can be stopped, or something that will always come back? The silence before the smile. Long before the laughter echoed through the streets, before the painted smile and the sharp, unsettling voice became part of Gotham's story, there was a different kind of silence that rested over the city. A silence that did not feel peaceful or calm, but instead felt heavy, like something waiting just beneath the surface, something not yet seen, but already present in ways that people could sense without fully understanding. Gotham City, even in those earlier days, was never truly a place of safety or comfort, because its foundations were already shaped by crime, by corruption, and by quiet deals made in shadowed rooms where power mattered more than justice, and where the line between right and wrong was often blurred until it became almost invisible. The streets were filled with movement, with people going about their lives, with cars passing under dim streetlights and conversations carried through the cold air. But there was always something else there too, something harder to name, something that lingered in the corners where the light did not quite reach, and in the quiet moments between noise, when the city seemed to pause just long enough for its deeper nature to be felt. It was a place where organized crime families held control over entire districts, where influence stretched far beyond what could be seen, and where even those who tried to do good often found themselves caught in a system that made change feel slow and uncertain. In those days, Gotham's danger followed patterns that could be understood, even if they could not be easily stopped, because there were rules, even among criminals, and there were structures that gave shape to the chaos, allowing it to exist in a form that people could recognize, fear, and in some ways, even predict. The powerful families operated with purpose, maintaining control through careful planning and quiet force. And while their actions caused harm and suffering, there was still a sense that everything moved within a certain order, a dark order, but an order all the same. The city lived with this balance, uneasy but familiar, like a storm that never fully passed, but also never completely broke. And yet, beneath that fragile structure, there was something else forming, something that did not belong to any system or rule, something that could not be controlled or guided in the same way. And while no one could point to it or name it clearly, there were moments when it could almost be felt, like a shift in the air or a quiet tension that had no clear source. It was not a person yet, not a face or a voice, but more like an idea, a possibility that had not yet taken shape, waiting for the right moment, or perhaps the wrong one, to emerge. The people of Gotham did not speak of it, because there was nothing concrete to describe, but there were small signs, subtle changes that passed unnoticed by most, like crimes that felt slightly different in tone, or actions that seemed less driven by gain and more by something harder to understand, something that did not fit neatly into the patterns the city had grown used to. It was as if the balance that had held Gotham in its uneasy state was beginning to shift, slowly at first, almost gently, but in a way that suggested something deeper was changing. Even those who lived close to the city's darker side, those who worked within its systems of power and control, began to feel that something was not quite the same, though they could not explain why, because everything still appeared to function as it always had. The deals were still made, the streets were still watched, and the rules were still followed. But there was a growing sense that those rules might not hold forever, that something existed beyond them, something that did not care for structure or control. There were quiet nights when the city seemed almost still, when the usual noise softened and the lights flickered gently against the buildings. And in those moments, Gotham felt like it was holding its breath, as if waiting for something to happen, something that had not yet arrived but was already on its way. It was not fear exactly, not yet, but more like a feeling of uncertainty, a question that had not been asked but was somehow already there, waiting to be answered. The idea of chaos was not new to Gotham, but it had always existed within limits, shaped by the needs and goals of those who caused it. But this was something different, something that did not seem to have a clear purpose or direction, something that felt more like a force than an action, something that could not be reasoned with or controlled in the same way. It was quiet, almost invisible, but it was there, growing slowly, like a shadow stretching further as the light begins to fade. And what made it more unsettling was not just its presence, but its absence, because there was no face to connect it to, no name to speak, no single event that could explain it, and so it remained undefined, something that existed only as a feeling, a sense that the city was not as stable as it once seemed, that the balance it relied on was more fragile than anyone had realized. It was the kind of absence that feels full, like an empty space that somehow carries weight, like a silence that says more than sound ever could. In this way, Gotham, before the rise of the Joker, was already a place standing on uncertain ground, a city that believed it understood its own darkness, that believed it could manage and contain it, but did not yet realize that something entirely different was approaching, something that would not follow the same patterns, something that would not respect the same boundaries. The silence before that change was not peaceful, but filled with quiet tension, like the moment just before something breaks, when everything seems still, but only because it is about to move all at once. And perhaps the most important part of this time was that no one truly saw it coming, not in the way it would happen, because while Gotham was used to crime and danger, it was not prepared for something that existed beyond reason, something that would challenge not just the city's safety, but its understanding of order itself. The idea that chaos could exist without purpose, without limits, was something that had not yet fully entered the minds of those who lived there, because they had always known a version of chaos that could be explained, that could be traced back to human needs and desires. But this was different, and even in its earliest, quiet form, it carried the sense that it would not remain hidden forever, that the silence would eventually be broken, not by something gradual or controlled, but by something sudden, something that would change the way the city saw itself. The streets, the buildings, the people, all of it would remain, but the feeling beneath it would shift, and once that shift happened, it could not be undone. So Gotham continued on, moving through its days and nights, unaware of how close it was to a turning point, unaware that the silence it lived in was not a stable state, but a pause, a moment held between what had always been and what was about to begin. And in that pause, in that quiet space where nothing yet had a name, the shape of something new was forming, something that would one day step forward and give that silence a voice that would not speak in calm tones or careful words, but in laughter that would echo through the city and change it forever. Until then, there was only the waiting, the stillness, and the quiet understanding that something was coming, even if no one could yet see it, and even if no one could yet imagine just how deeply it would reshape everything they thought they knew. A man without a name. There is something unusual about trying to understand a person who may not want to be understood. And when it comes to the Joker, the search for his origin does not lead to a clear answer, but instead opens into many different paths, each one telling a slightly different story, each one offering a version that feels possible but never fully certain. And this is what makes him different from most figures in Gotham, because while others have histories that can be traced, names that can be followed, and moments that can be clearly pointed to as the beginning, the Joker seems to exist in a space where those things do not stay still, where the past shifts and changes depending on who is telling it, and even sometimes depending on how he chooses to present it. Some stories suggest that he was once an ordinary man, someone who lived a simple life before everything changed, a man who may have struggled, who may have tried to make people laugh but found little success, and who may have carried quiet disappointments that slowly grew heavier over time, until one moment, one event, pushed him beyond the point where things could return to what they once were. In these versions, there is often a sense of sadness, a feeling that something important was lost, not all at once, but slowly, like a light dimming over time, until the person he once was could no longer be clearly seen. In another version, there is the image of a man connected to crime, not as a leader or a powerful figure, but as someone caught in a situation he did not fully control. Someone who became part of something dangerous, perhaps out of need or pressure, and who found himself in a place where one wrong step could lead to everything changing. This path often leads to a moment that is repeated in many tellings, a fall into chemicals that alter not just appearance but identity itself, transforming the outside in a way that reflects something deeper happening within. The pale skin, the green hair, the fixed smile that does not move as it should, all become part of the image people recognize. But the question of who he was before that moment remains unclear, as if the transformation erased more than just his face. And yet, even these stories do not stay firm, because there are times when the Joker himself speaks of his past, and when he does not offer one single version but many, changing details, shifting emotions, presenting one memory and then replacing it with another, as if the truth is something he can reshape at will. He once described his history as multiple choice, a phrase that may sound simple but carries a deeper meaning, because it suggests that his past is not something fixed, but something flexible, something that can be adjusted depending on what suits the moment, or perhaps depending on what he wants others to believe. This idea creates a strange situation, because it becomes difficult to separate what might be real from what might be imagined, and even more difficult to know if there is a single true version at all, or if the truth itself has been lost somewhere along the way. Some might say that the original story still exists beneath all the changes, hidden but still present, while others might believe that it no longer matters, because the person he once was has been completely replaced by what he has become. In this way, the mystery of his origin is not just about missing information, but about the possibility that identity itself can be broken apart and rebuilt in ways that no longer connect clearly to the past. In Gotham, names carry weight because they connect people to their actions, to their histories, and to the choices they have made. But the Joker moves outside of this pattern, because his name is not a real name in the usual sense, but a title, a role, something chosen rather than given, and this makes him harder to define, because without a clear name, there is no simple way to trace where he came from or who he used to be. It is as if he has stepped away from the idea of identity as something stable, something that can be held onto, and instead embraced something more fluid, something that does not need a past in order to exist. This raises an important question about what identity really is, because if a person can lose their name, their history, and their connection to who they once were, then what remains? And how much of a person is shaped by memory, by experience, by the story they tell about themselves? In the case of the Joker, it seems that identity has become something fragile, something that can be changed or even erased, leaving behind only the parts that he chooses to keep. It is not just that his past is unclear, but that it may have been intentionally broken apart, either by events that were too overwhelming to hold on to, or by a decision to let go of it completely. There is also the possibility that the shifting stories are not meant to hide the truth, but to show something about how he sees the world. Because if reality itself feels uncertain, if meaning can change depending on perspective, then a fixed past might feel limiting, while a flexible one allows for freedom, for movement, for the ability to exist without being tied to a single explanation. In this way, the multiple choice past becomes more than just a confusing detail, but a reflection of his deeper beliefs, a way of showing that nothing needs to stay the same, that everything can be questioned, even the idea of who someone is. At the same time, there is something unsettling about this, because it removes the sense of cause and effect that people rely on to understand actions. Because if there is no clear beginning, no stable origin, then it becomes harder to explain why things happen the way they do. Most people look for reasons, for events that lead to outcomes, for stories that connect one moment to the next. But with the Joker, those connections are not clear, and this creates a feeling of uncertainty, because it suggests that some things may not follow the patterns people expect. For those who try to study him, to understand what drives him and where he came from, this becomes one of the greatest challenges, because every clue leads to another question, and every answer feels incomplete, as if it is only one piece of something larger that cannot be fully seen. Some investigators focus on the possible origins, comparing different versions, looking for details that repeat, hoping to find something consistent, while others step back and consider that the lack of consistency might be the point itself, that the shifting nature of his past is not a problem to be solved, but a part of who he is. There is also a quiet possibility that somewhere, beneath all the changing stories, there was once a real person with a real name, someone who experienced real moments, who had real thoughts and feelings before everything changed, and that this person has not entirely disappeared, but remains hidden, buried under layers of transformation and reinvention. Whether that person could ever return, or whether they even exist in a way that could be recognized, is something that remains uncertain, because the longer the Joker exists as he is now, the further away that original identity seems to move. And so, the story of a man without a name becomes less about finding a single answer and more about understanding the nature of uncertainty itself, about recognizing that not all stories have clear beginnings, and that sometimes the absence of a fixed truth can be just as important as the presence of one. In Gotham, where so much is already difficult to control, this kind of mystery adds another layer, a sense that even identity, something people often think of as stable, can become something else entirely. In the end, what remains is not a clear origin, but a space filled with possibilities, a collection of stories that overlap and shift, none of them fully confirmed, none of them completely dismissed. And within that space, the Joker exists, not as a man defined by his past, but as something shaped by the absence of it, something that continues to move forward without needing to look back, leaving behind only questions that may never be fully answered, and a reminder that sometimes the most unsettling stories are the ones that refuse to settle into a single truth. The Killing Joke. There is a version of the Joker's story that returns again and again, not because it is proven to be true, but because it feels complete in a way the others do not, as if it forms a circle where cause and effect meet in a single moment that changes everything. And in this version, the Joker was once a man who simply wanted to be seen, someone who tried to stand in front of others and make them laugh, not out of cruelty or chaos, but out of a simple desire to connect, to be understood, and to find a place in a world that did not always offer easy paths for people like him. He was not powerful, not important, not feared, and in many ways, he was easy to overlook because his life was filled with small struggles that did not stand out on their own, but when placed together, began to form a quiet pressure that grew heavier with time, as his attempts to succeed as a comedian brought more disappointment than joy, and each failed performance seemed to take something from him, not all at once, but slowly, like pieces of confidence slipping away until what remained felt fragile and uncertain. There are moments described in this version where he stands on a stage, under dim lights, facing an audience that does not respond the way he hopes, where the silence between jokes feels longer than it should, and where the laughter he wants to hear never truly arrives. And in those moments, it is not just failure that he experiences, but something deeper, something that touches on his sense of self, as if each quiet reaction from the crowd reflects back a message that he does not belong in the way he imagined. Outside of those moments, his life continues, shaped by the need to survive, by responsibilities that do not wait for dreams to succeed, and by a growing sense that the path he chose may not lead where he hoped. And it is within this space, between what he wanted and what he faced, that desperation begins to form, not as a sudden change, but as something that builds quietly, step by step, until it becomes difficult to ignore. In some tellings, he is approached by people connected to crime, individuals who see him not for who he is, but for what he can be used for, offering him a role that seems simple on the surface, a way to earn money quickly, a way to solve immediate problems. And while he may not fully understand the risks, or may choose not to think too deeply about them, the decision to accept this path becomes one of the turning points, a moment where need outweighs caution, and where the direction of his life begins to shift in ways he cannot yet see. He becomes part of a plan, taking on the identity of the Red Hood, a masked figure used to hide the true person beneath, a role that removes his face, his name, and even his sense of individuality, turning him into something that can move through dangerous situations without being directly recognized. And in doing so, it places him in a position where he is no longer just a man trying to make sense of his life, but a piece of something larger, something far more dangerous. The night of the incident is often described with a kind of quiet tension, where everything seems to move forward with a sense of purpose. But beneath that, there is uncertainty, a feeling that things are not as controlled as they appear, and when events begin to unfold, they do not follow the plan as expected, leading to confusion, fear, and sudden movement that pushes him into a situation where escape becomes more important than understanding. In the chaos, there is a moment that stands out above the rest, a moment that changes everything, when he falls into a vat of chemicals, an event that is both physical and symbolic, because it marks the point where his life before and his life after can no longer be connected in a simple way. The fall itself is not long, but its impact stretches far beyond the seconds it takes, as the chemicals alter his appearance, changing his skin, his hair, and his expression into something unnatural, something that does not match the person he once was. When he emerges, the transformation is immediate and visible, but the deeper change is not just on the outside, because the shock of what has happened, combined with everything that came before it, creates a break within him, a moment where the pressure of his life, the failures, the fear, and the sudden loss of identity all come together in a way that is too much to hold on to in the same way as before. There are descriptions of him seeing his reflection, of looking at a face that no longer feels like his own, and in that moment, something shifts, not just in how he looks, but in how he understands the world, as if the connection between cause and effect, between action and meaning, begins to loosen, and what once felt important no longer holds the same weight. This is where the laughter begins, not as something joyful, but as something unexpected, something that rises from a place that does not follow the usual patterns of emotion, as if the mind, faced with too much to process, chooses a different path, one that turns pain into something else, something that can be expressed without needing to be explained. The laughter is not simply a reaction, but a sign of a deeper change, a shift in how reality is experienced and understood. From this point on, the idea of tragedy begins to change, because instead of being something to grieve, something to reflect on with sadness, it becomes something that can be reshaped, something that can be turned into a kind of joke, not because it is funny in the usual sense, but because it no longer fits into the structure it once did. The loss, the fear, the confusion all remain, but they are no longer expressed in the same way, and instead of leading to silence or withdrawal, they become part of something louder, something more visible. This transformation is often seen as the moment where the Joker is truly born, not just in appearance, but in thought, in the way he approaches the world, in the way he sees meaning and order, and in the way he begins to act without the same limits that once guided him. The man who once tried to make people laugh for acceptance now laughs in a way that does not seek approval, but instead challenges the very idea of what laughter means. At the center of this version of the story is a belief that one bad day can change everything, that the difference between stability and chaos is not as strong as people think, and that under the right conditions, anyone could reach a point where their understanding of the world shifts in a way that cannot be reversed. This idea becomes part of his actions, part of the way he interacts with others, as if he is trying to show that his transformation was not unique, but simply one example of something that could happen again. And yet, even within this story, there is uncertainty. Because while it provides a clear path from one state to another, from man to Joker, it is still only one version, one way of understanding what happened, and the fact that it is told in different ways, with small changes and variations, reminds us that even this iconic origin is not fixed, but part of a larger pattern where truth and interpretation exist side by side. In the end, what this story offers is not just an explanation, but a possibility, a way of seeing how a person might move from one state to another, how pressure, loss, and sudden change can come together in a single moment that reshapes everything, and how the mind, when faced with too much to hold, might choose a path that turns tragedy into something else, something that does not follow the rules that once seemed so clear. And in that transformation, in that moment where laughter replaces understanding, the silence that once filled Gotham begins to change, because it is no longer empty, but filled with something new, something that does not stay quiet for long, something that carries with it the echo of a story that may or may not be true, but feels real enough to leave a mark that cannot easily be removed. One bad day. There is an idea that the Joker returns to again and again, not as a quiet thought, but as something he carries into the world and places in front of others, something he tests, something he tries to prove through actions rather than simple words. And that idea is that all it takes is one bad day for a person to change completely, for the structure of their thoughts to bend, for the way they see the world to shift in a way that cannot easily be undone. And while this may sound like a simple claim, it carries a weight that becomes clearer when it is placed within the world of Gotham, a place where pressure, fear, and loss are already part of everyday life. In this belief, there is no strong barrier between stability and collapse, no permanent line that keeps people safe from falling into something darker, but instead, there is only a thin layer, something that can hold for a time but may break under the right conditions. And the Joker does not see himself as an exception to this idea, but as proof of it, as someone who experienced that one bad day and crossed from one state into another, and now looks at the world through that experience, convinced that others are not so different from him as they might believe. He does not explain this in a calm or careful way, because explanation alone is not enough for him, and instead, he creates situations where this belief can be tested, where people are placed under pressure, where their sense of control is challenged, where their expectations are broken down piece by piece until they are forced to respond in ways they may not have imagined before. These actions are not random, even if they appear chaotic on the surface, because beneath them there is a pattern, a direction, a purpose that is tied to this central idea. In some of his most well-known actions, he targets individuals who represent strength, stability, or moral clarity, people who seem grounded, who appear to stand firmly on one side of the line between right and wrong, and he places them in situations that test that stability, situations that remove comfort, that introduce fear, that force choices that are not simple or clean. It is in these moments that his belief becomes visible, because he is not only causing harm, but observing, watching how people react when their world no longer follows the rules they depend on. There is something unsettling about the way he approaches this, because it is not driven by a need for power in the usual sense, not by a desire to control territory or gain wealth, but by a need to demonstrate something, to reveal what he believes to be a hidden truth about human nature. And in doing so, he treats people not as individuals with their own stories, but as parts of a larger idea, as examples within a pattern he is trying to show. At the center of this belief is the fragile line between sanity and madness, a line that most people assume is strong, something that separates those who are stable from those who are not. But the Joker sees this line differently, not as a wall, but as something thin, something that can be crossed without warning, something that may not even be as clear as people think. To him, sanity is not a fixed state, but something that depends on conditions, on experiences, on how much pressure a person can hold. before something begins to change. This perspective shapes the way he interacts with the world, because he does not see himself as completely separate from others, but as someone who has simply moved further along a path that others could also walk. And this creates a strange connection between him and those he targets, because in his mind, he is not just opposing them, but trying to show them something about themselves, something they may not want to see. In many stories, this idea is directed toward individuals who stand as symbols of order, people who represent control, justice, or reason, and he challenges them in ways that go beyond physical conflict, creating situations where their beliefs are tested, where their decisions carry weight, where the outcomes are not simple victories or losses, but moments that leave lasting marks. These encounters are not only about action, but about thought, about the struggle to maintain a sense of self when everything around it is being pushed out of place. One of the most important aspects of this belief is that it removes the idea of certainty, because if anyone can change under the right conditions, then no one is completely safe from that change. And this creates a sense of unease, a feeling that stability is not guaranteed, that what feels solid can shift, that what seems clear can become uncertain. It is not just a statement about individuals, but about the nature of the world itself, suggesting that order is not as permanent as it appears. And yet, there is also a question that remains within this idea, a question that is not easily answered. Because while the Joker believes that one bad day can break anyone, the world around him does not always confirm this in the way he expects. There are those who face difficult moments and do not change in the same way, who hold on to their sense of self even when it is tested, and this creates a tension within his belief, because it suggests that the line between sanity and madness may be fragile, but not identical for everyone. This tension becomes part of the ongoing conflict between him and those who oppose him, because each encounter becomes more than just a struggle between two sides, but a test of this idea, a question asked again and again in different forms, with different outcomes, but never fully settled. The Joker continues to push, to test, to create situations where the line is challenged, while others resist, holding on to their beliefs, showing that while the line may be thin, it is not always crossed. There is also something deeply personal in the way he holds on to this belief, because it reflects his own experience, his own transformation, and in a way, it justifies it, turning what may have been a moment of loss into something that fits into a larger pattern, something that can be understood as part of how the world works, rather than something that happened only to him. By believing that anyone could become like him, he removes the sense of isolation, placing himself within a shared possibility rather than outside of it. But this belief also carries a kind of loneliness, because if everyone is only one bad day away from becoming something else, then connection becomes uncertain, trust becomes fragile, and the idea of stable identity begins to fade, leaving behind a world where everything feels temporary, where nothing is fully secure. In this way, his philosophy is not only about others, but about the kind of world he sees, a world where meaning shifts, where certainty breaks, and where the line between what is and what could be is never fully fixed. As time goes on, this idea continues to shape his actions, to guide the way he moves through Gotham, creating moments that reflect this belief, moments that challenge, that disrupt, that force others to confront situations they would rather avoid. And in doing so, he becomes not just a figure of chaos, but a kind of mirror, reflecting back the fears and uncertainties that already exist within the city. And so, the idea of one bad day remains at the center of his story, not as a simple explanation, but as a lens through which he sees everything, a way of understanding the world that drives his actions and shapes his interactions. And while it may never be fully proven or fully disproven, it continues to exist as a question, one that echoes through every encounter, every choice, every moment where the line between stability and collapse is tested, reminding everyone who faces it that the distance between who they are and who they could become may not be as wide as they once believed. The birth of chaos, after the moment that changed him, After the fall, after the laughter that no longer followed the same rules as before, the Joker did not enter Gotham quietly, and yet at first, what he did might have seemed small compared to the crimes the city already knew, because Gotham was used to danger, used to violence, used to people who took what they wanted and protected it with force. But what began to appear was something different, something that did not move in the same way, something that felt less like a step in an ongoing system and more like the start of something new that did not yet have a clear shape. The early actions connected to him were not only about what was taken or who was harmed, but about how those actions were presented, because there was already a sense of performance, a sense that what he was doing was meant to be seen, meant to be noticed, not just by those directly involved, but by the city itself, as if each act was part of a message that had not yet been fully understood. There were signs left behind, unusual details that did not fit the usual patterns, choices that seemed unnecessary if the goal had been simple gain, but which pointed towards something else, something that cared more about attention, about reaction, about the feeling left behind after the event had passed. In Gotham's underworld, crime was often structured, controlled by families or groups that operated with clear goals and clear boundaries, and while violence was part of that world, it was often used in ways that supported a larger plan, a system that aimed to maintain power and reduce risk. But the Joker did not follow these patterns, and from the beginning, there were signs that he had no interest in joining them, no desire to become part of an existing structure that would limit what he could do or how he could do it. There are accounts of his first true entrances into that world, moments where he made himself known not by quietly stepping into an existing role, but by disrupting what was already there, by appearing in places where he was not expected, by speaking in ways that did not match the seriousness of the situation, by acting as if the rules that others followed simply did not apply to him. These were not just acts of crime, but acts of presence, moments where he made it clear that he was not like the others, that he would not behave in ways that could be predicted or controlled. This difference was not only in his actions, but in his attitude toward the idea of crime itself, because while others saw it as a means to an end, as a way to gain power, wealth, or influence, the Joker seemed to treat it as something else entirely, something closer to expression, something that could be shaped and presented in ways that created impact beyond the immediate result. He did not build networks in the usual way, did not form alliances that could stabilize his position, did not follow the quiet agreements that allowed different groups to exist without constant conflict. And this made him difficult to place within the system, because he did not seem to belong to any part of it. At first, this may have been seen as a weakness, because in a world built on structure and control, someone who rejected those things could appear unstable, unreliable, and easy to remove. But as time passed, it became clear that this unpredictability was not a flaw, but a strength of a different kind, because it made him harder to anticipate, harder to trap, harder to understand. While others planned based on patterns, based on expected reactions, the Joker moved in ways that did not follow those expectations, creating situations where even those with experience found themselves uncertain of what would happen next. There were moments where his entrances into different parts of the city felt almost staged, as if he was stepping into a scene rather than simply arriving, bringing with him a presence that changed the atmosphere, that shifted the mood of the room, that made even those used to danger feel something unfamiliar. He would speak in ways that mixed humor with threat, calmness with sudden intensity, creating a sense that nothing was fixed, that everything could change without warning. This approach began to build a reputation, not just as a criminal, but as something more difficult to define, because people could not easily predict his goals or understand his limits. And in a place like Gotham, where understanding often meant survival, this lack of clarity created fear that spread beyond individual encounters. It was not just what he did, but what he might do. The sense that his actions were not bound by the same rules that others followed, that he could act without clear reason, without warning, without the usual signs that something was about to happen. As his presence grew, it became clear that he was not interested in controlling territory in the way others were, not interested in building an empire that could be measured and defended, but instead in creating moments, events that would leave a mark on the city's memory, that would challenge its sense of order, that would disrupt the patterns that people relied on. In this way, his actions began to reshape how crime itself was understood, because he introduced a form of chaos that did not fit into existing categories. There were those who tried to confront him, to bring him into line, to treat him as they would any other threat, but these efforts often failed to achieve the expected results because they relied on assumptions that did not apply, on strategies that required the other side to follow certain rules, and when those rules were ignored, the outcomes became uncertain. This created a shift in how he was viewed, moving from an unusual figure to something more serious, something that could not be easily dismissed or controlled. The Joker's rejection of traditional structures was not only a personal choice, but a statement about the world he operated in, because by refusing to follow those structures, he exposed their limits, showing that they depended on shared understanding, on agreement, on a willingness to operate within certain boundaries. And when someone stepped outside of those boundaries completely, the system itself began to show its weaknesses. In time, this led to a new kind of presence in Gotham, one that did not replace the existing forms of crime, but existed alongside them, influencing them, challenging them, forcing others to adapt in ways they had not needed to before. The city, which had once relied on patterns to maintain a kind of balance, found itself facing something that could not be balanced in the same way, something that introduced uncertainty into every situation. What made this transformation more significant was not just the scale of his actions, but the way they changed the feeling of the city itself, because Gotham was no longer just a place where crime followed certain paths, but a place where anything could happen, where the unexpected became part of everyday life, where the sense of control that people once held onto began to weaken. And so, the Joker established himself, not through power in the traditional sense, but through presence, through unpredictability, through the creation of moments that could not be ignored, and in doing so, he became something more than a participant in Gotham's underworld, becoming instead a force that moved through it without being contained by it, a force that did not need to follow the rules in order to have an impact, because its strength came from the fact that it existed outside of them. In this way, the birth of chaos was not a single event, but a series of moments that built upon each other, each one adding to the sense that something new had entered the city, something that would not settle into familiar patterns, something that would continue to challenge, to disrupt, to reshape the way Gotham understood itself, leaving behind a presence that could be felt even when it was not directly seen, a presence that reminded everyone that the rules they relied on were not as strong as they once believed, a different kind of criminal. In Gotham City, crime had long followed a pattern that people, even those who feared it, could at least recognize, because the powerful families that controlled much of the underworld operated with structure, with rules, and with goals that could be understood, even if they were not accepted. And this created a strange kind of order within the disorder, where actions were often tied to clear reasons such as money, territory, influence, or control, and where violence, while present, was usually used in ways that supported those goals, rather than existing for its own sake. These families built systems that allowed them to survive and grow, forming connections, making agreements, and maintaining a balance that, while dangerous, was stable enough to predict. Within this system, people knew what to expect, because there were signals, patterns, and behaviors that repeated over time, and even those outside of it could learn to recognize when something was about to happen, or when a certain area was becoming unsafe, or when a conflict was beginning to rise between different groups. This did not make Gotham safe, but it made it understandable, and in a place filled with danger, understanding could offer a small sense of control. Then came the Joker, and from the moment he began to move through this world, it became clear that he did not belong to it in the way others did, because he did not follow the same patterns, did not respond to the same signals, and did not seem to care about the same outcomes. While others built networks, he disrupted them. While others planned carefully, he acted in ways that felt sudden and without warning. And while others sought to gain something from their actions, he often left behind confusion instead of clear results. At first, those within Gotham's organized crime may have seen him as a problem that could be solved in familiar ways, as someone who could be removed, controlled, or forced into line, because that is how threats were usually handled. But as they began to interact with him more directly, it became clear that the usual approaches did not work, because they depended on the other side having something to lose, something to protect, something that could be used as pressure, and the Joker did not seem to operate with those kinds of limits. He did not build something that could be taken from him, did not create a structure that could be attacked in a predictable way, and did not rely on resources that could be cut off. And this made him difficult to engage with using the methods that had worked before. He was not interested in territory in the usual sense, not interested in controlling parts of the city for long periods of time, and not interested in maintaining stability within his own actions. And because of this, he moved differently, appearing in places without warning, leaving just as suddenly, and creating situations that did not fit into the patterns others were used to. One of the most striking differences between the Joker and Gotham's organized crime families was his lack of a clear motive that could be easily understood, because while others acted for reasons that could be explained, even if they were harmful, the Joker often acted in ways that did not point to a single goal, and this created a sense of uncertainty that went beyond fear of harm, because it removed the ability to predict why something might happen. When people cannot understand the reason behind an action, it becomes harder to prepare for it, harder to respond to it, and harder to feel safe from it. In many cases, his actions seem to focus not on gaining something tangible, but on creating a reaction, on changing the way people felt, on disrupting the sense of order that they relied on. And this made his presence different from others who used fear as a tool to control, because the fear he created was not tied to clear consequences or clear conditions, but to the idea that anything could happen at any time, without warning or reason. This shift in the nature of fear was one of the most important changes he brought to Gotham, because before, fear often came from known sources, from powerful figures whose actions followed certain rules, and while those rules could be dangerous, they also provided a kind of structure that people could understand. With the Joker, that structure began to break down, replaced by something less stable, something that did not follow the same logic, something that could not be easily predicted or explained. There were moments where his actions seemed almost playful on the surface, where he used humor, bright colors, or unusual methods to carry out his plans. And this created a contrast that made the underlying danger feel even more unsettling, because it combined elements that did not usually belong together, mixing lightness with threat, laughter with harm. And in doing so, it made it harder for people to respond in a clear way, because the usual signals were no longer reliable. Those who tried to understand him often found themselves facing the same challenge, because every attempt to define his motives led to more questions, and every explanation seemed incomplete, as if it only captured part of what was happening. Some believed that his actions were driven by a desire to prove a point, to show something about the world or about human nature, while others believed that there was no deeper reason, that the actions themselves were the goal, that the disruption, the confusion, the reaction they caused were enough. This uncertainty became part of his identity, because it allowed him to exist outside of the categories that others used to understand the world, and in doing so, it made him more difficult to stop, because strategies that depended on clear motives or predictable behavior did not apply in the same way. He became something that could not be easily measured or compared, something that required a different way of thinking, a different approach that many were not prepared for. Over time, this led to a shift in how people in Gotham experienced fear, because it was no longer just about avoiding certain places or certain people, but about living with the knowledge that danger could appear in unexpected ways, that the patterns they once relied on were no longer enough to keep them safe, and that the line between normal life and sudden chaos had become thinner. Even those within the organized crime world began to feel this change, because their systems, which had once provided a level of control, were now being challenged by something that did not respect those systems. And this forced them to adapt, to reconsider how they operated, to deal with a presence that could not be easily controlled or removed. In this way, the Joker did not just exist alongside Gotham's criminal world, but reshaped it, introducing a new element that changed how everything else functioned. And yet, despite all of this, there remained a question that could not be fully answered, a question about what truly drove him, about whether there was something deeper beneath the surface, something that connected his actions in a way that was not immediately visible, or whether the absence of a clear motive was itself the point, a reflection of a world that did not always follow simple rules. In the end, what set the Joker apart was not just what he did, but how he did it, the way he moved through Gotham without being tied to the structures that defined others, the way he created fear, not through power alone, but through unpredictability, through the breaking of patterns, through the removal of certainty. He became a different kind of criminal, one who did not seek to control the city in the usual sense, but to change how it felt, how it responded, how it understood itself, leaving behind a presence that could not be easily contained, and a reminder that sometimes the most unsettling threat is not the one that is strongest, but the one that cannot be understood. The Bat and the Clown. When the Joker began to leave his mark on Gotham, there was already another figure moving through the same city, someone who had chosen a very different path, someone who did not laugh or seek attention in the same way, but instead worked in silence, in shadow, guided by a strong sense of control and purpose. And this was the figure that Gotham had started to call Batman, a presence that stood against crime not with chaos, but with discipline, with careful thought, and with a belief that order could be built even in a place as broken as Gotham. At first, their paths did not cross in a direct and lasting way, because Gotham was large and filled with many stories happening at once. But as the Joker's actions grew more visible and more disruptive, it became clear that these two figures were moving toward each other, not by chance, but because the nature of what they represented could not exist separately for long. The first encounters between them are often described not as simple fights, but as moments of recognition, where each begins to understand the other, not fully, not completely, but enough to see that this is not a usual opponent, not someone who can be treated like the others they have faced before. For Batman, who had spent time learning patterns, studying criminals, understanding motives and methods, the Joker presented a challenge that did not fit into those systems, because there was no clear pattern to follow, no stable behavior to predict, and no simple way to anticipate what would happen next. For the Joker, the meeting with Batman was something different as well, because here was someone who represented the opposite of everything he had become, someone who lived by rules, even in a city that often ignored them, someone who believed that order could still exist, that meaning could still be held together, that actions could be guided by purpose rather than impulse. This contrast was not lost on him, and from the beginning, there was a sense that their encounters were not only about stopping or escaping, but about something deeper, something connected to how each of them saw the world. Their early confrontations often took place in settings that reflected this contrast. Dark streets where silence met sudden laughter, carefully planned movements interrupted by unexpected turns, moments where control was tested by chaos, and where each side tried to understand the other through action. Batman would move with precision, analyzing, adapting, trying to bring structure to situations that seemed to resist it, while the Joker would move in ways that broke that structure, creating confusion, changing direction, forcing responses that were not part of the original plan. It was in these encounters that a kind of pattern began to form, not a predictable one, but a relationship that grew with each meeting, where each began to shape the other's actions in subtle ways. Batman started to prepare not just for crime, but for unpredictability, adjusting his methods to deal with something that did not follow the rules he had studied, while the Joker began to focus more directly on Batman, not just as an obstacle, but as someone who could be challenged, someone whose beliefs could be tested. The idea of duality, of two opposing forces, became more visible as their interactions continued, because they seemed to exist as reflections of each other in many ways, one standing for order, for control, for the belief that the world, even a broken world, could be guided towards something better, and the other standing for chaos, for disruption, for the idea that order is fragile, that meaning can be broken, that everything people rely on can be turned upside down. This contrast was not just in what they did, but in how they thought, how they moved, how they responded to the same situation in completely different ways. Batman's actions were often driven by a need to protect, to prevent harm, to restore balance, and this required patience, planning, and a willingness to hold on to a clear sense of right and wrong, even when the world around him made that difficult. The Joker's actions, on the other hand, seemed to move in the opposite direction, not seeking to build or restore, but to break, to challenge, to show that the structures people depend on are not as strong as they believe. In this way, each encounter between them became more than just a conflict, but a moment where these two ideas met and clashed. As time passed, their rivalry began to deepen, moving beyond the simple idea of hero and villain, because it became clear that they were connected in a way that went beyond their roles, that each one influenced the other, that each one responded to the presence of the other in ways that shaped their actions. The Joker did not treat Batman like any other opponent, often focusing on him directly, creating situations that were designed to challenge not just his abilities, but his beliefs, his sense of control, his understanding of the world. Batman, in turn, found himself facing a kind of challenge that was different from anything else he had encountered, because it was not just about stopping a crime, but about maintaining a sense of order in the face of something that constantly tried to undo it, something that pushed against the limits of his methods, something that forced him to think in new ways, to adapt, to question, to find ways to respond without losing the core of what he stood for. This connection created a tension that continued to grow, because each encounter added something new. Each moment built upon the last, creating a history that was not just a series of events, but a relationship that evolved over time. There were moments where the line between conflict and understanding seemed to blur, where the Joker appeared to see something in Batman that others did not, where he treated their interactions as part of a larger idea, a kind of ongoing exchange that went beyond simple opposition. At the same time, there was always a clear difference between them, a line that was not crossed, because while they influenced each other, they did not become the same, and this difference was important, because it showed that even in the face of constant challenge, even in a world filled with uncertainty, there could still be a separation between order and chaos, between control and madness, even if that separation was tested again and again. For Gotham, this rivalry changed the way the city experienced both figures, because it was no longer just about individual actions, but about the ongoing presence of two forces that shaped the environment in different ways, one trying to hold things together, the other trying to pull them apart. The city became a space where this struggle played out repeatedly, not always in the same way, but always carrying the same underlying tension. In the end, the relationship between the Bat and the Clown became something that could not be easily defined, because it was not just a story of good versus evil, but a story of contrast, of connection, of two different ways of seeing the world brought into constant contact. It was a rivalry that carried meaning beyond individual events, a reflection of deeper ideas about order and chaos, about control and unpredictability, about the ways in which people respond to a world that does not always follow clear rules. And as their encounters continued, as their paths crossed again and again, it became clear that this was not something that would end quickly or simply, but something that would continue to shape both of them, something that would remain at the center of Gotham's story, a quiet understanding that, in the presence of one, the other would always follow, not as a simple reaction, but as part of a connection that had grown into something much deeper than either of them may have expected. The joke that never ends. There is a rhythm to Gotham that becomes clearer the longer one listens. Not a calm rhythm that brings comfort, but one that rises and falls in repeating patterns, like waves that reach the shore again and again without ever fully stopping. And within that rhythm, there is a part that belongs to the Joker, a pattern that does not fade with time but instead returns, over and over, creating a sense that what has already happened is never truly finished. It is not simply that he commits crimes and is then stopped, because that would suggest an ending, a clear point where one moment closes and another begins, but with him, the story feels unfinished even when it pauses, as if each ending is only a quiet space before the next beginning. One of the most unsettling parts of his presence in Gotham is the way he cannot be contained in a lasting way, because while he is captured, held, and placed within walls that are meant to keep him from the city, those walls do not hold him forever, and his return is not rare enough to be surprising, but frequent enough to feel expected, as if his absence is only temporary, as if his presence is something that the city cannot fully remove, no matter how many times it tries. This creates a sense of repetition, a cycle where the same struggle appears again and again, not exactly the same each time, but close enough that the pattern becomes clear. Arkham Asylum stands at the center of this cycle, a place built to contain those who cannot be placed in ordinary prisons, a place where minds are studied, where behavior is observed, where treatment is attempted, and where the goal is not only to stop harmful actions, but to understand the reasons behind them. For many, Arkham is a place of confinement, a place where movement is limited and freedom is removed. But for the Joker, it often becomes something else as well, something closer to a stage, a setting where he continues to act, to speak, to influence, even when he is behind locked doors. Within its walls, he does not become quiet or still, but continues to engage with those around him in ways that blur the line between patient and performer, because his words, his actions, and even his silence seem to carry meaning beyond the moment, as if he is always aware of the larger story, always aware that what he does within those walls will eventually connect to what happens outside them. This makes Arkham different when he is there, because it is not only a place of observation, but a place where the next part of the cycle begins to take shape. There are many attempts to contain him, to study him, to understand what drives him, to find a way to prevent his return to the city, but each attempt faces the same challenge, because the Joker does not behave in ways that are easy to predict or control, and this makes it difficult to apply the usual methods that might work with others. He may appear calm one moment and unpredictable the next. He may speak in ways that seem clear but carry hidden meanings, and he may act in ways that do not follow the expected patterns, making it hard to know what is real and what is part of something larger. The structure of Arkham itself, with its routines and rules, is designed to bring order to disorder, to create a controlled environment where behavior can be managed. But when faced with someone who thrives on breaking structure, who uses unpredictability as a strength, that structure begins to show its limits. The Joker does not simply resist the system, but interacts with it in ways that change how it functions, turning observation into performance, turning confinement into opportunity, and turning the idea of a prison into something less certain. His escapes are not always the same, and this adds to the sense of unpredictability, because sometimes they involve careful planning, sometimes sudden action, and sometimes a combination of both. But what remains consistent is the result, the return to the city, the continuation of the cycle, the sense that no matter how strong the walls may seem, they are not enough to hold him permanently. Each escape reinforces this idea, not just for those who try to stop him, but for the city itself, creating a growing awareness that this is not a problem that can be solved once and for all. For Gotham, this repetition creates a feeling that is difficult to fully express, because it is not just fear of what might happen, but a kind of exhaustion, a sense that the struggle does not end, that even when there is a moment of quiet, it may not last. that the return is always possible, always near. This affects how people think, how they respond, how they understand safety, because it removes the idea of a final resolution, replacing it with an ongoing process that continues without a clear end. At the center of this cycle is the connection between the Joker and Batman, a relationship that does not move toward a simple conclusion, but instead repeats in different forms, each encounter building on the last, each moment adding to the history they share. When the Joker escapes, it is not only the city that responds, but Batman as well, stepping once again into a role that has become familiar, yet never fully predictable, because each return brings something new, something that requires a fresh response. This creates a pattern where their conflict becomes part of the city's rhythm, a repeated interaction that shapes both of them over time, because with each encounter, they learn, they adapt, they change in small ways, and yet the overall structure remains the same, a cycle that continues without a clear endpoint. It is not a simple loop, but something more complex, where each repetition carries the memory of the last, where the past influences the present, and where the future remains open. The idea that the joke never ends is not only about the Joker's actions, but about this cycle itself, because it suggests that what is happening is not meant to reach a final conclusion, but to continue, to repeat, to exist as an ongoing process rather than a completed story. This challenges the way people usually think about conflict, because it removes the expectation of a clear victory or defeat, replacing it with something that exists in motion, something that continues without resolving. There is also something deeply connected to the Joker's own view of the world within this pattern, because if he sees life as something that does not follow clear rules, something that can change without warning, something that does not guarantee meaning or order, then this cycle reflects that view, showing a world where actions do not lead to simple endings, where efforts to control or contain do not always succeed, and where the story continues even when it seems like it should stop. And yet, within this repetition, there is also resistance, because each time he returns, there are those who stand against him, who try again to stop him, to contain him, to protect the city. And this creates a balance within the cycle, a movement between action and response, between chaos and order, between disruption and control. It is not a balance that settles, but one that shifts constantly, creating a dynamic that keeps the story moving forward even as it repeats. In the quiet moments, when the Joker is once again within Arkham, when the city experiences a brief pause, there is a sense of stillness that feels temporary, as if it is only a matter of time before the cycle begins again. And this awareness shapes how that stillness is experienced, not as a true end, but as a space between events, a moment where the next part of the story is already forming. And so, the pattern continues, the escapes, the returns, the encounters, the attempts to contain, the failures, the new attempts, all of it forming a cycle that does not close, a joke that does not reach a final punchline, but continues to unfold, repeating in different ways, shaping the city, shaping those who live within it, and leaving behind a sense that some stories are not meant to end, but to continue, quietly, endlessly, moving forward even as they return to where they have been before, smiles behind the violence. There is something deeply confusing about laughter when it appears in the wrong place, when it rises not from joy or kindness, but from moments that carry fear, pain, or danger. And this confusion becomes one of the strongest parts of the Joker's presence in Gotham, because he does not simply commit crimes, but surrounds them with humor, with smiles, with gestures that seem playful on the surface, creating a contrast that makes everything feel more unsettling, more difficult to understand, and more difficult to respond to in a clear way. The sound of laughter, which most people learn to connect with happiness, becomes something else entirely when it comes from him, something that no longer feels safe or familiar, but sharp and unpredictable. From the beginning, the Joker does not hide behind darkness in the same way many others do, because while Gotham already holds shadows and quiet threats, He brings something brighter into those spaces, colors, exaggerated expressions, and a kind of performance that draws attention rather than avoiding it. And this choice changes how his actions are experienced, because instead of fading into the background, they stand out, becoming moments that people remember, not only for what happened, but for how it felt, how strange and confusing it was to witness something so harmful presented in such an unusual way. His use of humor is not simple, because it does not follow the patterns that people expect, and it is not meant to bring comfort or connection, but instead seems to act as a mask, something that covers what lies beneath while also drawing attention to itself, creating a layer that makes it harder to see clearly what is happening. When he speaks, he often mixes jokes with threats, light tones with serious actions, creating a space where meaning becomes unclear, where words can shift from one moment to the next, and where it becomes difficult to know how to respond, because the usual signals that guide understanding are no longer reliable. This blending of humor and harm creates a feeling that is difficult to describe, because it does not allow the mind to settle into a single response, forcing it instead to move between different emotions, between confusion and fear, between disbelief and awareness. And in that movement, there is a kind of tension that stays even after the moment has passed. It is not only what he does, but how he frames it, how he presents it, how he turns actions into scenes that feel almost like performances, where every detail seems chosen, every moment shaped in a way that suggests intention beyond the immediate result. There are times when his crimes appear almost like acts on a stage, where he takes control of the environment, the people within it, and the sequence of events, guiding them in ways that create a sense of structure within the chaos, even if that structure is not meant to bring order, but to highlight its absence. He may enter a place in a way that feels planned, not just for success, but for impact, choosing how he appears, what he says, how others react, as if the crime itself is only one part of a larger performance meant to leave a lasting impression. This obsession with performance becomes clearer when looking at how he repeats certain patterns, how he returns to the idea of the joke, the setup, the timing, the reaction, as if he sees the world as something that can be arranged like a story, even when that story leads to harm. The people involved become part of that arrangement, not always by choice, but by circumstance, placed into roles within a scene that they do not control, where their reactions become part of what he is trying to create. There is something unsettling about this approach, because it removes the sense of randomness that might make an event feel distant or unpredictable in a simple way, and replaces it with something more intentional, something that feels designed, as if every moment is part of a plan that is not fully visible from the outside. This creates a deeper level of unease, because it suggests that what is happening is not just chaotic, but guided by a perspective that sees value in the reaction itself, in the confusion, in the disruption. The blending of comedy and horror becomes most clear in the way these elements exist side by side, without separating, without allowing one to fully replace the other, creating a space where laughter and fear are connected in ways that feel unnatural. A joke may be delivered in a moment that carries danger, a smile may appear where it does not belong, and this combination forces the mind to hold two opposing ideas at once, creating a sense of imbalance that is difficult to resolve. For those who encounter him, this can be one of the most challenging aspects, because it makes it harder to respond in a clear and steady way, as the usual emotional signals are mixed, leading to hesitation, confusion, and a sense that the situation is not following the expected path. This gives him an advantage, not just in action, but in perception, because it disrupts the ability to think clearly, to anticipate, to prepare. At the same time, this use of humor as a mask suggests something about what lies beneath, because a mask is not only something that hides, but something that can also reveal in indirect ways. And in the Joker's case, the constant presence of humor may point to a deeper relationship with pain, with loss, with a view of the world that does not see things in the same stable way as others do. It is as if laughter has become a way of expressing something that cannot be spoken directly, something that cannot be held in a simple form. This does not make his actions less harmful, but it adds a layer that makes them more complex, more difficult to fully understand, because it suggests that the surface is not the whole story, that what is visible is only part of something deeper, something that continues to shape the way he moves through the world. The performance, the humor, the theatrical elements all become tools, not just for action, but for expression, for communication, in a way that does not rely on clear or direct meaning. In Gotham, where people are already used to danger, this blending creates a new kind of experience, because it changes not just what happens, but how it is felt, how it is remembered, how it stays in the mind after it is over. The image of a smile in the middle of something dark becomes something that lingers, something that does not fade easily, because it does not fit into the usual categories that people use to process events. Over time, this becomes part of his identity, something that sets him apart, not just in action, but in presence, because he is not only a source of harm, but a source of confusion, of contrast, of moments that do not resolve in a simple way. The city begins to recognize this pattern, to expect that when he appears, things will not follow the usual rules, that the line between what is meant to be light and what is meant to be dark will blur. And so, the smiles behind the violence become more than just expressions, more than just part of his appearance, but part of the way he shapes the world around him, part of the way he turns events into something else, something that does not settle into a single meaning, something that continues to echo after it is over, leaving behind not just the memory of what happened, but the feeling of it, the confusion, the tension, the uneasy connection between laughter and fear that does not fully fade. In the end, what remains is the sense that humor, when used in this way, is no longer simple or safe, but something that can carry weight, something that can change how events are experienced, something that can turn even the most serious moments into something that feels uncertain. And in that uncertainty, the Joker finds space to act, to perform, to continue shaping the story in ways that are not easily understood, but are impossible to ignore. The people he broke. There are moments in Gotham that do not fade the way other events do, moments that do not simply become part of the past, but remain present in quieter ways, shaping how people think, how they feel, how they move forward even after the immediate danger has passed. And when it comes to the Joker, some of the most lasting effects of his actions are not found only in what can be seen, but in what remains within the people he has touched, the people whose lives were changed in ways that cannot be easily repaired or fully understood. While many of his actions are loud and visible, filled with chaos and attention, there are certain moments that carry a different kind of weight, moments where the focus is not on the city as a whole, but on individuals, on people who become part of his attempt to prove something, to show that the line between stability and collapse is not as strong as it seems. And in these moments, the impact reaches deeper, moving beyond the surface and into the quiet spaces where thoughts and emotions begin to change. One of the most well-known of these moments involves Barbara Gordon, a person who had built her life around intelligence, courage, and a strong sense of purpose, someone who worked to protect others and to make a difference in a city that often made that difficult. Her story was not one of weakness, but of strength, of someone who chose to stand against danger rather than avoid it. And this made what happened to her even more significant, because it was not just about what was taken from her, but about how that event challenged everything she had built. In that moment, the Joker did not act simply to harm, but to demonstrate something, to create a situation that would test not only her, but those connected to her, to show that even someone strong could be pushed into a place of vulnerability, that even a life built on purpose could be disrupted in an instant. The physical harm was immediate and clear, but the deeper impact came afterward, in the way it changed how she experienced the world, how she understood her own place within it, and how she had to rebuild parts of herself in ways that were not part of her original path. The story of Barbara Gordon does not end in that moment, however, because what follows is just as important. The process of adapting, of finding new ways to continue, of turning loss into something that does not erase who she is, but reshapes it. This shows that while the Joker's actions can cause deep harm, they do not always lead to the outcome he expects, because people are not only defined by what happens to them, but by how they respond, how they rebuild, how they continue, even when the path forward has changed. Another story that carries a similar weight is that of Jason Todd, a young person who stepped into a role filled with danger, who chose to stand beside Batman, to face threats that were far greater than what most would ever encounter, and who carried with him a strong sense of determination, even if it was sometimes mixed with anger or impatience. His story reflects the risks that come with stepping into that world, the challenges of trying to do what is right in a place that does not always reward those choices. When the Joker targeted Jason Todd, the impact was not only physical, but deeply emotional, affecting not just Jason himself, but also those connected to him, especially Batman, who had taken on a role not just as a partner, but as a guide, as someone responsible for protecting and teaching. The loss that followed was not simple, not something that could be easily explained or resolved, but something that left a mark, something that changed the way decisions were made, the way risks were understood, the way responsibility was carried. In both of these cases, and in many others that are less widely known but no less important, the Joker's actions reach beyond the immediate moment, creating effects that continue long after the event itself has ended. The damage is not limited to the body, but extends into the mind, into the way people see themselves, into the way they interact with others, into the way they understand the world around them. This kind of impact is more difficult to measure because it does not always appear in visible ways, but it can be seen in changes in behavior, in moments of hesitation, in shifts in how trust is given or withheld, in the quiet adjustments that people make as they try to move forward. It is found in the weight carried in certain memories, in the way certain events are remembered, in the way certain places or situations bring back feelings that are not easily set aside. The Joker's focus on this kind of impact reflects his belief that harm is not only about physical damage, but about breaking something deeper, about changing how a person experiences the world, about creating a moment that cannot be undone. In this way, his actions are often aimed at creating lasting effects, at leaving behind something that continues to exist even when he is no longer present. For Gotham, this creates a different kind of legacy, one that is not only about the events that take place, but about the people who carry those events with them, who continue to live with the effects, who shape the future based on what they have experienced. The city becomes not just a place where things happen, but a place where those things leave marks, where the past continues to influence the present. There is also an important contrast in how different people respond to these experiences, because while some may struggle to move forward, others find ways to adapt, to grow, to use what has happened as part of a larger story that does not end with the moment of harm. This shows that while the Joker may aim to break people, the outcome is not always complete, not always final, because people are not simple, and their responses are shaped by many factors, by their own strength, by their support, by their choices. At the same time, it is important to recognize that not all damage can be fully repaired, that some effects remain, that some changes are lasting, and that this is part of what makes these stories so important, because they show the real cost of what happens, not just in the moment, but over time. The pain, the loss, the adjustment, all become part of the story, part of the way the city understands itself. For Batman, these moments carry a particular weight because they connect directly to his sense of responsibility, to his role as someone who tries to protect others. And when harm reaches those close to him, it becomes more than just part of the larger struggle. It becomes personal, something that shapes his decisions, his limits, his understanding of what is at stake. These experiences influence how he approaches the Joker, how he prepares, how he responds, adding depth to a conflict that is already complex. In the end, The people the Joker has broken are not defined only by what was done to them, but by what remains afterward, by the ways they continue, by the paths they choose, by the strength they find or struggle to find, and by the impact they carry into the future. His influence extends far beyond the moment of action, reaching into the lives of those affected, shaping stories that continue long after the event itself has passed. And so, when looking at the full picture of his actions, it becomes clear that the true impact is not only in the visible chaos, but in the quieter, lasting effects, in the changes that remain, in the ways people are shaped by what they have experienced, and in the understanding that some of the deepest marks are not the ones that can be seen, but the ones that stay within, continuing to influence the world in ways that are not always easy to notice, but are always present. The madness of Gotham. Gotham City has always carried a certain heaviness, a feeling that settles over its streets like a quiet fog, something that cannot be fully seen but can always be felt. And long before the Joker became part of its story, that feeling was already there, shaped by years of crime, by broken systems, by people who tried to hold things together while others pulled them apart. And in this way, the city was already fragile, already holding tension beneath its surface, already standing on ground that was not as steady as it appeared. But when the Joker entered that space, when his actions began to spread through the city, that tension did not simply increase, it changed, becoming something less predictable, something harder to understand, something that moved in ways that did not follow the patterns Gotham had grown used to. At first, his influence may have seemed limited, just one more threat among many, just one more figure moving through the city's already crowded landscape of danger. But over time, it became clear that what he brought was not just another layer of crime, but a shift in how crime itself was experienced. Because he did not follow the same rules, did not act with the same goals, and did not leave behind the same kind of results. His actions created confusion, disrupted expectations, and introduced a kind of unpredictability that began to spread beyond individual events, affecting how people thought, how they reacted, how they understood the world around them. Fear in Gotham had always existed, but it had often been tied to known sources, to specific groups, to certain places or situations that could be avoided or prepared for. And while that fear was real and serious, it still allowed for a kind of understanding, a sense that danger could be managed, even if it could not be completely removed. The Joker changed that by creating fear that did not follow clear patterns, fear that was not tied to a single place or time, fear that could appear without warning and without clear reason. And this made it harder for people to feel safe, not just in specific areas, but in general. This kind of fear spreads differently because it does not stay contained within certain boundaries, but moves outward, affecting more and more parts of the city, changing how people behave, how they interact, how they move through their daily lives. Small decisions begin to change. People become more cautious, more uncertain, more aware of the possibility that something unexpected could happen at any moment. And this creates a shift in the atmosphere of the city, a sense that things are not as stable as they once seemed. The Joker's influence is not only in what he does directly, but in how those actions ripple outward, affecting others who may not even be connected to the original event, creating a chain of reactions that continues long after the moment has passed. People begin to react not only to what has happened, but to what might happen, to the possibility of future events, and in this way, his presence extends beyond the immediate, becoming part of the city's ongoing experience. There are also those within Gotham who respond to this influence in different ways, because when faced with unpredictability, some people try to create more control, to hold onto structure more tightly, while others begin to lose that sense of structure, finding it harder to maintain their usual ways of thinking, their usual sense of stability. This creates a range of responses, from increased order in some areas to increased disorder in others, and this variation adds to the overall complexity of the city. In some cases, the Joker's actions seem to inspire others, not in the sense of following him directly, but in the sense of showing that the usual rules do not have to be followed, that disruption is possible, that unpredictability can exist within the system. This can lead to a kind of spread, where elements of chaos begin to appear in places where they were not before, not always in the same form, but carrying the same underlying idea that structure is not as strong as it appears. This creates a feedback loop where the presence of chaos leads to more reactions, which lead to more instability, which in turn creates more opportunities for further disruption. And in this cycle, the city begins to reflect the ideas that the Joker represents, not because it fully accepts them, but because it is influenced by them, shaped by them, changed by the repeated exposure to them. Gotham, in this way, becomes something like a mirror, reflecting not only the actions that take place within it, but the ideas behind those actions, the beliefs that drive them, the perspectives that shape them. The Joker's view of the world, a view where order is fragile, where meaning can shift, where unpredictability is always present, begins to appear within the city itself, not as a direct copy, but as a pattern that can be seen in different forms. At the same time, there are forces within Gotham that resist this influence, people and systems that try to maintain stability, to push back against the spread of chaos, to restore a sense of order. And this creates a tension that exists throughout the city, a constant movement between disruption and control, between uncertainty and structure. This tension does not settle, but continues, shaping the way the city evolves over time. The idea that a city can reflect a single person's philosophy may seem unusual, but in a place like Gotham, where the environment is already shaped by extreme conditions, where the line between order and disorder is already thin, the influence of someone like the Joker can have a wide reach because it interacts with existing conditions, amplifies them, changes them in ways that extend beyond individual actions. Over time, this influence becomes part of the city's identity, something that is recognized even when it is not directly visible. A sense that Gotham is a place where anything can happen, where the unexpected is part of everyday life, where stability is always being tested. This does not mean that the city becomes completely chaotic, because there are always efforts to maintain balance, always people working to hold things together. But it does mean that chaos becomes a more visible part of that balance, something that cannot be ignored or easily removed. For those who live in Gotham, this creates a complex experience, because they must navigate a world where both order and chaos exist at the same time, where moments of calm can be followed by sudden change, where the familiar can shift into something uncertain. This requires adaptation, awareness, and a constant adjustment to the changing conditions of the city. In the end, the madness of Gotham is not only about individual actions, but about the overall environment, about how those actions interact, how they influence the city as a whole, how they shape the way people think and behave. The Joker's influence becomes part of this, not as the only factor, but as a significant one, a force that pushes the city in certain directions, that challenges its stability, that reveals its weaknesses. And so, Gotham stands as a place that reflects both the struggle to maintain order and the presence of chaos that continues to challenge it. A place where the ideas carried by the Joker are not just seen in his actions, but in the way the city responds, adapts, and changes, creating a complex and shifting environment that carries the mark of everything that has happened within it, including the quiet, persistent influence of a figure who turned unpredictability into something that could shape an entire city. The many faces of the Joker. When people try to describe the Joker, they often find themselves returning to the same problem again and again, which is that he does not stay still in a single form, and no matter how many times his story is told, he appears slightly different each time, not only in how he looks, but in how he speaks, how he acts, and how he understands the world around him. And this creates a strange situation where the same figure can feel familiar and unfamiliar at the same time, as if each version carries something recognizable, while also introducing something new that changes the overall picture. Across different stories, Whether in printed pages, moving images, or spoken retellings, the Joker has been shaped in ways that reflect not only the character himself, but also the time and the perspective of those telling the story. And this means that he can appear as many things, depending on where one looks. In some versions, he is loud and playful, a prankster who uses tricks, jokes, and unusual devices to create chaos in ways that feel almost exaggerated, where the danger is present, but often mixed with a kind of bright, strange energy that makes everything feel like a twisted game. In other versions, that playfulness becomes something darker, something more serious, where the humor is still present but feels sharper, more controlled, more intentional. And in these portrayals, the Joker may appear as someone who is not simply acting on impulse, but thinking carefully, planning actions that carry deeper meaning, actions that are meant to challenge others not only physically, but mentally, forcing them to confront ideas that are uncomfortable or difficult to accept. There are also portrayals where he is seen as something closer to an anarchist, someone who does not believe in systems or structures, someone who actively works to break them down, not for personal gain, but to show that they can be broken, to reveal what he sees as the hidden truth, that order is not as stable as it appears. In these versions, his actions may feel less like random chaos and more like a focused attempt to remove the idea of control, to push others into situations where they must face the possibility that the world does not follow clear or fair rules. In yet other interpretations, the Joker takes on the role of a kind of philosopher, though not in a traditional sense, because his ideas are not presented in calm discussions or careful explanations, but through actions, through situations that act as questions, through events that force others to think, even if they do not want to. In these moments, he may speak about the nature of reality, about the meaning of order, about the line between sanity and madness, offering views that challenge common beliefs, even if those views are difficult to accept or fully understand. What makes all of these versions interesting is that while they differ in tone, in style, and in focus, they all carry a central element that remains consistent, which is chaos, not just as an action, but as a way of being, as a perspective that shapes everything else. No matter how he appears, whether as a prankster, an anarchist, or a thinker, there is always a sense that he does not follow the usual rules, that he exists outside of the structures that guide others, that he moves in ways that are not easily predicted. This consistency within change is what allows the Joker to remain recognizable even when the details shift, because while his personality may vary, the core idea does not disappear, and this creates a kind of continuity that connects all versions, allowing people to see them as parts of a larger whole rather than completely separate figures. It is as if the form can change, but the essence remains, adapting to different contexts while holding on to the same underlying principle. In comics, this variety is often explored through different storylines, different writers, and different artistic styles, each bringing their own interpretation to the character, sometimes emphasizing one aspect over another, sometimes combining elements in new ways. This leads to a wide range of portrayals, from more light-hearted versions that focus on exaggerated antics, to darker versions that explore deeper psychological themes, and each of these adds something to the overall understanding of who the Joker is. In films, the character is often shaped by the vision of the director and the performance of the actor, leading to portrayals that feel distinct and memorable, each one offering a different take on the same figure. Some focus on the theatrical nature of the Joker, highlighting the performance, the voice, the movement, creating a presence that is larger than life, while others focus on the internal aspects, the mindset, the beliefs, creating a version that feels more grounded, more connected to real-world ideas about behavior and thought. These differences do not cancel each other out, but instead exist alongside each other, forming a collection of interpretations that together create a richer, more complex picture. This can make it difficult to define the Joker in a single sentence, because any definition would need to account for these variations, for the way he can be many things at once, depending on how the story is told. At the same time, this variety reflects something about the nature of the character itself, because the idea of having multiple faces, multiple versions, multiple ways of being, fits with the concept of identity as something flexible, something that can change, something that is not fixed in one form. The Joker, in this sense, becomes a figure that resists simple definition, that exists in motion rather than in a stable state. For those who study or follow these stories, this creates an ongoing process of interpretation, where each version is considered, compared, and connected to others, where patterns are identified, where differences are explored, and where the question of what defines the Joker remains open. Some may prefer one version over another, finding certain portrayals more meaningful or more effective, while others may appreciate the variety itself, seeing it as part of what makes the character enduring. There is also an interesting effect that comes from this range of portrayals, which is that it allows the Joker to adapt to different times and different audiences, to remain relevant even as the world changes, because his form can shift to reflect new concerns, new ideas, new ways of thinking, while still holding onto the core element that defines him. This adaptability contributes to his lasting presence in storytelling, allowing him to continue appearing in new forms without losing his identity. Despite all these changes, the presence of chaos remains the connecting thread, the element that ties everything together, the part that does not disappear even when other aspects shift. It is seen in the unpredictability of his actions, in the challenge he presents to order, in the way he disrupts expectations, in the way he forces others to react in ways they did not plan. In the end, the many faces of the Joker do not create confusion as much as they create depth, offering multiple ways to understand a single idea, multiple perspectives on a figure that cannot be easily limited. Each version adds something, each interpretation reveals a different angle, and together they form a picture that is not fixed but constantly evolving. And so, while the Joker may appear in many forms, while his personality may shift from playful to serious, from chaotic to thoughtful, from exaggerated to grounded, the central idea remains: a presence that challenges order, that questions stability, that exists in contrast to structure, reminding us that even when the surface changes, the deeper patterns can remain, shaping the way the character is understood across every version, across every story, across every face he wears. The clown as a symbol. There comes a point when a figure in a story begins to feel larger than the person they once were, when their actions and presence start to carry meaning beyond a single life, beyond a single set of events. And this is what slowly happens with the Joker, because over time, he no longer feels like just a man moving through Gotham, but something more difficult to define, something that seems to exist not only in what he does, but in what he represents, in the ideas that follow him, in the reactions he creates in others. At first, it may seem simple to describe him as a criminal, as someone who causes harm and disruption, but that description does not fully capture the effect he has on the world around him, because his presence goes beyond actions, reaching into how people think, how they understand themselves, how they see the structures they rely on. And in this way, he becomes something closer to a symbol, something that stands for ideas that are not always easy to face. One of the strongest parts of this symbolic role is the idea that he is more than a man, not in the sense that he has powers or abilities beyond human limits, but in the sense that his identity is not tied to a single clear origin, not fixed in a way that can be easily traced or explained. Because his past is uncertain, because his story changes, because his actions do not always follow a clear pattern, he becomes harder to place within the usual categories. And this allows him to exist as something broader, something that can take on different meanings, depending on how he is seen. In this way, the Joker can be understood as a kind of force, not a force of nature in the physical sense, but a force within the world of ideas, something that pushes against order, something that challenges stability, something that questions whether the structures people depend on are as strong as they believe. He does not simply break rules, but highlights them, showing where they hold and where they fail. and in doing so, he becomes a presence that reveals rather than hides. This connects to the idea of him as a mirror, because a mirror does not create something new, but reflects what is already there. And when the Joker interacts with others, when he places them in difficult situations, when he challenges their beliefs, he often brings out parts of them that were already present, but not always visible. He does not always add something new, but instead removes the layers that keep certain thoughts or feelings hidden, allowing them to surface in ways that can be uncomfortable or even frightening. For individuals, this can mean being forced to confront fears, doubts, or impulses that they would rather ignore, to face the possibility that their sense of control is not as strong as they thought, that their choices may not be as simple as they believed. For the city as a whole, it means revealing the cracks in its structure, the weaknesses in its systems, the places where order depends on conditions that can change. This is what makes the Joker's presence so unsettling, because it suggests that the darkness he represents is not entirely separate from the world, but connected to it, part of it, something that exists within it rather than outside it. When he acts, he does not introduce chaos into a perfectly ordered system, but exposes the chaos that was already there, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to become visible. The fear that comes from this is different from the fear of physical harm alone, because it touches on something deeper, something connected to the idea that what he represents could exist anywhere, that the conditions that allowed him to become what he is are not unique, that they are part of the same world that others live in. This creates a sense that his story is not completely separate, but connected, that it reflects something that could happen again, in different forms, in different places. There is also a kind of uncertainty in this, because if he is more than a man, if he represents an idea, then stopping him in a physical sense does not fully remove what he stands for, because ideas can continue even when the person connected to them is gone or contained. This adds another layer to his presence, because it means that his influence can extend beyond his direct actions, shaping thoughts and reactions in ways that are not always visible. In Gotham, this becomes part of how the city understands itself, because the Joker's actions force people to look at their own systems, their own beliefs, their own assumptions, and to question whether they are as strong as they appear. This questioning can lead to change, to attempts to strengthen what is weak, but it can also lead to doubt, to uncertainty, to a sense that stability is always at risk. The idea that he represents something universal comes from this connection, from the way his presence reflects patterns that are not limited to one place or one time, but can be found in different forms across different situations. The tension between order and chaos, between control and unpredictability, between stability and change, is not unique to Gotham, but part of a larger experience that exists in many places. And the Joker becomes a figure through which this tension is explored. This does not mean that everyone will respond in the same way, or that everyone will see the same meaning, but it does mean that the ideas connected to him can be recognized, can be felt, can be understood even if they are not fully accepted. The discomfort that comes from this recognition is part of what gives his presence its lasting effect, because it does not stay contained within a single story, but connects to broader questions about how people live, how they think, how they respond to a world that is not always stable. At the same time, there is resistance to this idea, because many people choose to hold on to the belief that order can be maintained, that systems can be strengthened, that stability can be achieved, and this creates a balance between the ideas he represents and the efforts to oppose them. This balance is not fixed, but shifts over time, influenced by events, by choices, by the ongoing interaction between different forces within the city. The Joker, as a symbol, exists within this balance, not as something that fully replaces other ideas, but as something that challenges them, that pushes against them, that keeps them from becoming too certain, too fixed. His presence ensures that the question remains open, that the possibility of change, of disruption, of uncertainty is always part of the conversation. In the end, understanding the Joker as a symbol does not remove the reality of his actions, but adds to it, providing a way to see how those actions connect to larger ideas, how they influence not only what happens, but how it is understood. He becomes a figure that represents more than himself, a reflection of deeper patterns, a reminder that the line between order and chaos is not always clear, that the structures people rely on are not always permanent. And so, the clown becomes more than a person, becoming instead a presence that carries meaning beyond a single identity, a symbol that reflects both the darkness that exists within the world and the ongoing struggle to understand and respond to it, leaving behind not only the memory of what he has done, but the questions he raises, questions that do not always have simple answers, but continue to shape how the story is told and how it is understood. The Bat's reflection. There are moments in Gotham when the line between action and meaning begins to blur, when what happens on the surface starts to connect to something deeper beneath it. And nowhere is this more visible than in the relationship between Batman and the Joker, because over time, their encounters stop being simple conflicts and begin to feel like reflections, as if each one reveals something about the other, as if each one exists not only in opposition, but in connection, shaping and defining each other in ways that are not always easy to see at first. Batman stands as a figure built on control, on discipline, on the belief that even in a broken city, there can still be a path toward order, toward protection, toward a kind of balance that keeps things from falling apart completely. His methods are careful, guided by rules that he has chosen for himself, rules that do not change easily, even when the world around him does. These rules are not only about what he does, but about what he refuses to do, because he believes that certain lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed, and that holding on to those lines is part of what keeps him from becoming the very thing he fights against. The Joker, in contrast, moves without those limits, or perhaps more accurately, he moves in ways that challenge the idea of limits itself, pushing against boundaries, testing them, trying to show that they are not as strong as they appear. When these two meet, it is not only a clash of actions, but a clash of beliefs, of ways of seeing the world. And this is where the deeper challenge begins, because the Joker does not simply try to defeat Batman in a physical sense, but tries to reach into the core of what Batman stands for, to test whether those rules can hold under pressure. There are many moments where the Joker creates situations that are designed not just to cause harm, but to force choices that are not simple, that do not have clear right answers, choices that place Batman in positions where his values are tested in ways that go beyond the usual struggles. These are not random challenges, but carefully shaped moments that aim to reveal something, to show what happens when the conditions change, when the pressure increases, when the usual paths are no longer available. In these moments, the question of limits becomes central, because Batman must decide how far he is willing to go, what he is willing to do, what he is not willing to do, even when the situation makes those decisions difficult. The Joker, watching, observing, often seems to wait for a moment where those limits might break, where the line might be crossed, where the structure that Batman has built for himself might collapse under the weight of what is happening. This is where one of the most important questions in their relationship begins to take shape. A question that is asked not only by the Joker, but by others, and even by those watching their story from a distance. And that question is why Batman does not kill the Joker, why he continues to stop him, to capture him, to return him to Arkham, knowing that the cycle will likely continue, knowing that the danger will return, knowing that more harm may follow. The answer to this question is not simple, because it is not based on a single reason, but on a set of beliefs that Batman holds on to. Beliefs about justice, about responsibility, about the difference between stopping harm and becoming the source of it. For Batman, killing is not just an action, but a line that, once crossed, changes everything, not only in terms of what happens externally, but in terms of who he becomes internally. He believes that if he allows himself to take that step, to decide that one life can be ended for the sake of others, then the structure that guides him may begin to weaken, that the line between him and those he fights may begin to blur. The Joker understands this, And this is what makes their interactions more complex, because he often brings this question to the surface, directly or indirectly, creating situations where the pressure increases, where the cost of not crossing that line becomes more visible, where the consequences of holding on to those limits become harder to accept. In doing so, he turns the question into a test, not only of action, but of belief, asking whether Batman's rules can survive in a world that does not always support them. This creates a tension that does not resolve easily, because there are arguments on both sides, reasons to hold the line, reasons to question it, and within that tension, their relationship continues to develop, not as a simple opposition, but as something more connected. The Joker, in many ways, depends on Batman, not in the sense of needing protection or support, but in the sense that Batman provides something for him to push against, something to challenge, something to define himself in relation to. At the same time, Batman's role is shaped by the presence of the Joker, because the nature of the threats he faces, the situations he must respond to, the limits he must maintain, are all influenced by the kind of chaos that the Joker brings into the city. Without that presence, his path might be different, his challenges less focused on these extreme questions, and so, in a way, each one becomes part of the other's story. This connection can feel almost like a form of dependence, not because they support each other, but because their identities, their actions, their roles are tied together in ways that continue over time. The Joker seems to recognize this, often treating their encounters not as isolated events, but as part of an ongoing interaction, something that continues, something that does not end with a single outcome. There are moments where this connection becomes more visible, where the way they speak to each other, the way they act in each other's presence, suggests an awareness of this relationship, an understanding that what they are doing is not only about the immediate situation, but about something larger, something that has developed over time. The Joker may refer to their interactions as part of a shared story, while Batman remains focused on stopping the immediate threat. But even within that difference, the connection is there. For Gotham, this relationship becomes part of the city's identity, because the ongoing interaction between these two figures shapes the environment, influences the events that take place, and creates a pattern that continues over time. The city becomes the space where this reflection plays out, where the challenge between order and chaos is not only an idea, but a lived experience. In the end, the Bat's reflection is not only about what Batman sees when he faces the Joker, but about what is revealed through that encounter, about the questions that are raised, about the limits that are tested, about the beliefs that are challenged. It is about the understanding that their relationship is not simple, not one-sided, but something that exists between them, shaping both of them in ways that are not always visible, but always present. And so, as their story continues, as their encounters repeat and evolve, the reflection remains, showing not only the difference between them, but the connection that ties them together. A connection built on contrast, on challenge, on the constant testing of lines that define who they are and who they choose to remain, even in a world that continues to push against those choices. Death, return, and reinvention. There are stories in Gotham that seem to follow a path with a clear beginning and a clear end, where events move forward, reach a point of closure, and then settle into memory, becoming part of the past in a way that feels complete. But the Joker's story does not move like that, because again and again, it reaches moments that appear to be final, moments that seem to suggest an ending, and yet those endings do not hold, they do not remain in place, and instead, they open into something else, something that continues, something that returns in ways that feel both familiar and new at the same time. There have been many times when it has seemed that the Joker is gone, moments where his presence disappears from the city, where his actions stop, where the chaos that follows him quiets. And in those moments, there is often a sense of relief, a belief that perhaps this time, the cycle has been broken, that perhaps the story has reached its end. These moments may come after a confrontation, after an event that feels large enough to close the story, after a situation where it appears that he has been defeated, removed, or simply lost. But what makes these moments different from true endings is what comes after, because the silence does not last, and the absence begins to feel uncertain, as if it is not a final state but a pause, a space where something is changing, something is forming, something is preparing to return. The Joker does not simply come back in the same way each time, but often appears with slight differences, changes in tone, changes in behavior, changes in how he presents himself. And this creates a sense that each return is not just a continuation, but also a kind of reinvention. This pattern of disappearance and return becomes part of his identity, something that defines him as much as his actions do, because it creates the impression that he cannot be fully removed from the story, that no matter what happens, he will find a way back, that the idea of a final end does not apply in the same way. This is not only about physical survival, but about presence, about influence, about the way he exists within Gotham and within the stories told about it. In some cases, these returns are explained through events, through circumstances that allow for survival, through situations where what seemed final was not truly so. But in other cases, the explanation is less clear, less defined, and this adds to the sense that his existence is not tied to a single path, but can move in different directions, can take on different forms, can adapt in ways that are not always predictable. This idea that he cannot truly be erased is connected to more than just his ability to return, because it reflects the way his presence has become part of the larger system of Gotham, part of the way the city functions, part of the way its stories are told. Even when he is not physically present, the effects of his actions remain. The changes he has caused continue. The patterns he has influenced stay in place. And in this way, his impact does not disappear, even if he does. Reinvention becomes a key part of this process, because each time he returns, there is often something different about him, something that reflects a new direction, a new approach, a new way of interacting with the world. This does not mean that he becomes a completely different person, because the core elements remain: the unpredictability, the challenge to order, the presence of chaos. But the form those elements take can shift, creating a sense that he is always moving, always changing, always adapting. This ability to change allows him to remain relevant, to continue to challenge those around him, to avoid becoming something that can be fully understood or easily predicted. If he remained the same in every detail, it might become easier to anticipate his actions, easier to prepare, easier to respond. But by changing, by reinventing himself, he maintains the sense of uncertainty that defines his presence. There is also something symbolic in this pattern, because the idea of death and return is not only about physical events, but about transformation, about the way identity can shift, about the way something can end in one form and begin again in another. In this sense, each return can be seen as a new version, a new expression of the same underlying idea, a continuation that does not repeat exactly, but evolves over time. For those who face him, this creates an ongoing challenge, because they are not only dealing with a known threat, but with something that changes, something that requires constant adaptation, something that cannot be approached in exactly the same way each time. This adds to the difficulty of stopping him, because it removes the possibility of a fixed solution, replacing it with an ongoing process that must adjust as he does. For Gotham, this pattern reinforces the idea that some stories do not have simple endings, that some forces cannot be fully removed, that some presences continue even when they seem to disappear. This does not mean that the city stops trying to protect itself, that people stop working to maintain order, but it does mean that there is an understanding, sometimes quiet, sometimes more visible, that the cycle may continue, that the return is always possible. There is also a deeper question within this pattern, a question about what it means to exist in this way, to be part of a story that does not end, to be connected to a cycle that continues without a final conclusion. It raises the idea that identity, in this case, is not fixed but fluid, not tied to a single moment, but spread across many, not defined by one version, but by a series of reinventions that together create something larger. The Joker, through this pattern, becomes something that exists both within and beyond individual events, something that cannot be fully captured in a single moment, something that continues to evolve, to change, to return. His story becomes less about a single life and more about an ongoing presence, a force that moves through time, adapting, reshaping itself, maintaining its core while altering its form. In the end, the cycle of death, return, and reinvention becomes one of the defining features of his character, something that sets him apart, something that ensures that his story remains open, that it continues, that it does not settle into a final state. It reflects a world where endings are not always permanent, where change is constant, where identity can shift, where the line between what was and what will be is not always clear. And so, even when it seems that the Joker is gone, even when the city experiences a moment of quiet, there is always the possibility of return, not as a repetition of what has already happened, but as a new version, a new expression, a continuation that carries the past within it, while moving into something different, something that keeps the story alive, something that ensures that the presence he represents is never fully erased, but always waiting, always changing, always ready to appear once more. The endless game. There is a way of looking at the world where everything feels like it is building towards something, where events connect in a clear line, where actions lead to results, and where stories move toward endings that make sense. But the Joker does not seem to see life in this way, because to him, the idea of a final answer, a clean conclusion, or a clear purpose often feels empty, as if the structure people depend on is only something they have created to feel safe, something that does not truly hold when it is tested. Instead, he treats life more like a joke that never fully lands, a setup that keeps going without a final punchline, a sequence that continues not because it must end, but because it simply does not. This view shapes how he moves through Gotham, because if life does not need to resolve into something meaningful, then actions do not need to follow a path that leads to a clear result. And this allows him to act in ways that seem disconnected from usual goals, ways that focus more on the moment, on the reaction, on the disruption itself, rather than on what comes after. In this sense, each event becomes part of an ongoing sequence, not a step toward an ending, but a continuation of something that is already in motion. When this idea is placed within his relationship with Batman, it becomes even more clear, because their interactions do not follow a simple pattern of conflict leading to resolution, but instead form a cycle, a repeated exchange where each encounter leads to another, where each moment carries into the next, creating a sense that their story is not moving toward a final conclusion, but is instead part of something that continues without a clear endpoint. The Joker seems to understand this, and in many ways, he embraces it, treating his encounters with Batman as part of a larger game, not a game with clear rules or a defined goal, but one that exists for its own sake, one that continues because it can, one that holds meaning not in how it ends, but in how it unfolds. He often acts as if the process itself is what matters, as if the repetition, the interaction, the ongoing exchange is more important than any final outcome. This creates a situation where the usual idea of victory or defeat becomes less clear, because even when one moment ends with the Joker being stopped, captured, or removed from the city, the larger pattern does not end, and the expectation of return remains. In the same way, even when Batman succeeds in protecting others or restoring order for a time, the knowledge that the cycle may continue remains present, shaping how those moments are understood. There is a kind of balance within this cycle, though it is not a stable or comfortable one, because it is constantly shifting, constantly changing, moving between moments of chaos and moments of control, between disruption and restoration, between unpredictability and careful response. This balance does not settle into a fixed state, but continues to move, creating a rhythm that defines much of Gotham's experience. The Joker's view of life as a joke without a punchline also connects to his belief that meaning is not fixed, that it can change depending on perspective, that what seems important in one moment may not hold the same weight in another. This belief allows him to move through situations without being tied to a single goal, to adapt, to shift, to respond in ways that do not follow a clear path, and this adds to the sense that his actions are part of something larger but less defined. For Batman, this creates an ongoing challenge because his approach depends on structure, on purpose, on the idea that actions lead to outcomes, that efforts to protect and restore can make a difference. And while these efforts do have impact, they exist within a system that is constantly being challenged by the Joker's approach, creating a tension between two different ways of seeing the world. This tension is not resolved through a single encounter, but continues, shaping each interaction, influencing each decision, creating a dynamic where both sides adapt and respond to each other over time. Batman prepares for the Joker's unpredictability, adjusts his methods, strengthens his resolve, while the Joker continues to test those limits, to find new ways to challenge the structure that Batman represents. Over time, this interaction becomes something that feels almost inevitable, as if the presence of one calls for the presence of the other, as if the balance between them requires both sides to exist, not in harmony, but in opposition that continues without end. This does not mean that either one wants the other to exist in a simple sense, but that their roles have become connected, their stories intertwined in a way that is difficult to separate. The idea that their story has no true ending is not only about the events themselves, but about the nature of what they represent, because as long as the ideas of order and chaos continue to exist, as long as the tension between control and unpredictability remains part of the world, the pattern they embody will continue as well, even if the details change, even if the forms shift. For Gotham, this creates a unique kind of narrative, one that does not move toward closure, but remains open, always continuing, always evolving, always carrying the memory of what has come before, while moving into what comes next. The city becomes a place where stories do not simply end, but transform, where each moment connects to another, where the past remains present in the patterns that continue. There is also something strangely calm within this endless cycle, because once the expectation of a final ending is removed, what remains is the process itself, the ongoing movement, the interaction that continues without needing to resolve. This does not remove the danger or the tension, but it changes how they are understood, shifting the focus from outcome to experience, from conclusion to continuation. The Joker, in his own way, seems to find something within this, a kind of freedom in the lack of a final answer, a space where actions do not need to lead to a single result, where the story can continue without being limited by the need to end. This does not make his actions less harmful, but it does explain why he does not seek closure, why he does not aim for a final victory, why he continues to move within the cycle rather than trying to break it. Batman, on the other hand, continues to work within that cycle, not because he accepts it as final, but because he believes that each moment still matters, that each action still has value, that even within an ongoing process, there is meaning in what is done, in the protection offered, in the balance maintained, even if it is temporary. And so, the endless game continues, not as a simple loop, but as a living pattern, one that changes over time, one that carries the weight of each encounter, one that reflects the ongoing tension between two different ways of seeing the world. It is a story that does not settle, that does not close, that remains open, shaped by each new moment, each new choice, each new interaction. In the end, what remains is not a final answer, but a continuing question, a reflection of a world where not everything leads to a clear conclusion, where some stories exist in motion, where the joke continues without a final punchline, and where the meaning is found not in how it ends, but in how it unfolds, moment by moment, without ever fully stopping. The last laugh. When a long story begins to slow down, when the loud moments grow quieter, and the movement that once felt constant begins to soften, there is often a chance to look back, not to find a simple answer, but to understand what has remained, what has changed, and what continues to exist even when the visible action fades. And in the case of the Joker, this kind of reflection does not lead to a clear ending, but to a deeper awareness of the mark he has left behind, not only on Gotham City, but on the way people think about order, chaos, and the space between them. His legacy is not something that can be placed in a single moment or a single event, because it stretches across many stories, many encounters, many lives that have been touched in different ways. And in this sense, it exists more like a pattern than a point, something that can be seen in the repetition of certain ideas, in the return of certain themes, in the way the city itself continues to carry traces of what he has done. Even in moments when he is not present, when his voice is not heard, when his actions are not directly shaping events, there is still a sense that something remains, a quiet reminder of the changes that have already taken place. In Gotham, this legacy can be felt in the way people move through their lives, in the caution that appears in small decisions, in the awareness that stability is not guaranteed, in the understanding that the unexpected can always return. The city does not stop, it does not freeze in place, but it carries forward with a different kind of knowledge, one shaped by experience, one shaped by the memory of moments that did not follow the usual rules. This knowledge becomes part of the environment, part of the way the city functions, part of the way it understands itself. Beyond Gotham, the Joker's presence extends into something broader, because the ideas connected to him do not stay limited to one place, but connect to larger questions about how people see the world, about how they understand the balance between control and unpredictability, about how they respond to situations that challenge their sense of order. In this way, his story becomes more than a local one, becoming part of a larger conversation about human experience, about the tension that exists between different ways of thinking, different ways of acting. At the center of this reflection is a question that does not have a simple answer, a question about whether the Joker is a warning or a truth, whether his story serves as a sign of what should be avoided, a reminder of what can happen when things fall apart, or whether it reflects something that already exists within the world, something that cannot be fully removed, something that continues to be part of the larger system. This question remains open because both possibilities can be seen in different ways, depending on how one looks at the story. If he is seen as a warning, then his actions become a lesson, a demonstration of the consequences of losing control, of allowing chaos to take hold, of stepping beyond the limits that keep systems stable. In this view, his story becomes something to learn from, something that shows the importance of structure, of responsibility, of holding on to the lines that define what is acceptable. It becomes a reminder that actions have consequences, that choices matter, that the loss of balance can lead to outcomes that affect many people in lasting ways. If he is seen as a truth, then his presence becomes something more complex, something that reflects conditions that already exist, something that reveals rather than creates, something that shows what can happen not because it is rare, but because it is possible within the world as it is. In this view, his story becomes a reflection of deeper patterns, a demonstration of how fragile certain systems can be, how easily they can be disrupted under the right conditions, how the line between order and chaos is not fixed, but always shifting. These two ways of seeing him do not cancel each other out, but exist together, creating a space where the story can be understood from different angles, where meaning is not limited to a single interpretation, but remains open, shaped by perspective, by experience, by the way each person connects to the ideas presented. This openness is part of what allows the story to continue to matter, to remain relevant, to be explored again and again in different forms. As the story slows, as the focus moves away from action and toward reflection, there is a sense of quiet that begins to settle. Not a complete silence, but a softer presence. A moment where the intensity fades just enough to allow for thought, for understanding, for a kind of calm that follows movement. In this quiet, the details of what has happened begin to feel less sharp, less immediate, but they do not disappear. They remain, held within memory, within the structure of the story. Chaos, in this moment, does not vanish, but changes, becoming less visible, less active, but still present in a quieter form, like something that has stepped back rather than left, something that waits rather than ends. This is part of what makes the conclusion feel different, because it does not close the story in a final way, but allows it to rest, to settle, to exist without needing to move forward immediately. There is something gentle in this kind of ending, something that does not force a final answer, but instead allows the story to remain open, to continue in the background, to exist as part of a larger pattern that does not require closure to have meaning. It reflects the idea that not all stories are meant to end completely, that some continue in quieter ways, influencing what comes next even if they are not at the center of attention. For Gotham, this means that the presence of the Joker, even when not active, remains part of its identity, part of its history, part of the way it understands itself. The city continues, changes, grows, but carries with it the memory of what has happened, the awareness of what is possible, the understanding that balance is something that must be maintained, not assumed. For those who think about the story, who reflect on what it means, there is a space here to consider the larger ideas, to look at the patterns, to understand the connections between events, to see how individual actions can shape broader outcomes. It is a moment that invites thought rather than action, a moment that slows down the pace and allows for a deeper kind of awareness. And so, as everything settles, as the movement quiets, as the story reaches this softer point, what remains is not a final statement, but a feeling, a sense of something continuing beneath the surface, something that has not ended, but simply paused, something that carries forward in ways that are not always seen, but are always present. The last laugh, in this sense, is not a loud or sudden sound, but something distant, something fading, something that lingers just enough to remind us that while chaos may settle, it does not disappear completely, and that within every quiet moment, there is always the possibility of movement, of change, of the story continuing in ways that cannot yet be fully known, but are always part of what comes next. And now, as our long journey through the story of the Joker begins to quiet, the noise of Gotham slowly softens, like distant echoes fading into the night, until what once felt sharp and overwhelming becomes something gentler, something far away, like a memory drifting just beyond reach. The laughter that once carried through dark streets no longer feels loud, but distant, like a sound carried off by the wind, leaving behind only a quiet understanding of the path we have followed. The city rests again, its lights dim and steady, its streets calm beneath the stillness, as if Gotham itself is taking a slow breath, releasing the weight it has been holding for so long. The stories we explored, the chaos and the questions, begin to settle into silence, no longer asking to be answered, only to be felt. And as your mind begins to drift, you can let it all grow softer, letting each thought fade gently, like shadows dissolving into the dark, until there is nothing left to follow, nothing left to hold on to. Only the quiet and the calm and the slow, peaceful feeling of rest.